US President Joe Biden is continuing to tear up Donald Trump's legacy, today trying to position the United States as a world leader on climate change. He signed a series of executive orders to boost renewable energy production and shift away from some forms of fossil fuels. He's laying the groundwork to meet an ambitious target of net zero carbon emissions by 2050. Here's ABC correspondent Matthew Doran in Washington.
In the lead up to Joe Biden taking office, he did try to make a clear point of distinction between what his administration would do and what the Trump administration would do if indeed they were in the White House. And he is following through on that. We've already seen Joe Biden return to the Paris Climate Agreement, something that Donald Trump had pulled out of. And he had also put a pause on a massive pipeline project that was happening in the United States and in Canada, saying that that should not go ahead for the time being. This adds to that by doing things like putting a pause on further oil and gas exploration on American public lands and also in its offshore waters. It's curbing some of the subsidies that are going to some of these energy companies as well, and pledging to greatly expand the use and the production of wind power by the year 2030. So it's a few different elements adding on top of or layering on top of one another, I should say, trying to uphold those pledges that Joe Biden made during the election campaign. There are some elements, because of course this is governing via executive order, there are some elements of long-term policy that will need to go through Congress, particularly things like oil and gas exploration leases, changes to how they function, but this is the first steps there. And Joe Biden saying that as far as he's concerned, the previous administration were avoiding the inevitable and that climate change is going to be a part of his administration for the next few years.
In my view, we've already waited too long to deal with this climate crisis. We can't wait any longer. We see it with our own eyes, we feel it, we know it in our bones, and it's time to act. And I might note parenthetically, if you notice, the attitude of the American people toward greater impetus on focusing on climate change and doing something about it has increased across the board, Democrat, Republican, Independent.
And Matthew, what did the President's new special envoy for climate change have to say about Australia in pushing these new plans from Joe Biden?
Yeah, the new special envoy is John Kerry, someone who's very familiar to public office, having served as Secretary of State under the Obama administration, having had a run at president himself. He addressed the World Economic Forum, which is normally held in person in the Swiss ski resort of Davos today, but of course with coronavirus it was held remotely. But he cited a piece that he read a few months back about climate change, and in particular picking up on some of the satellite imagery that had been put around the internet during those devastating bushfires that gripped much of the country, much of Australia back in 2019-2020, and quoted one line from this article which said that the world is at war and it is currently losing the battle with climate change. It's interesting that he uses that as an example, and the associated or the ongoing problems from those bushfires, such as the impact it's had on wildlife, on vegetation, and getting back to some sense of normality as an example of why the world does need to act more strongly when it comes to climate change. And certainly his comments there, it might prompt a bit of discussion back in Australia about whether or not the federal government is doing enough when it comes to its carbon emissions reduction targets, considering that we also learned today that the new administration will make a new judgment call on what its short-term carbon emissions reduction targets will be in April. That'll be a target to meet by the year 2030.